inevitably, we think that mobile networks will play a big role for this type of aviation. Because the aviation that we're talking about for UAVs and AAM is very different from the normal aviation. Here we're talking about low altitude, we're talking about a very high density in urban areas for all the services that drones will provide, from aero taxis to drone delivery to inspection to all police. So we are talking about an ecosystem that looks very different from the traditional aviation, but also very different from the normal cell phones ecosystem, because we have these flying vehicles that behave very differently, both in terms of mobility and connectivity, but also the requirements they have. And they're not the traditional crewed aviation that is normally higher altitude, and it's really very high density only close to the airports. So the problematics are very different. We see cell networks playing a very big role, but we see also the adaptation of other technology that are coming as an example from the automotive field for the connection of drones to drones, for communication, for example for detect and avoid and the related services to avoid all of these. We see the relevance of mobile networks for service provisioning, for UAS operator, for the UTM, and we see all these pieces needing to interconnect to each other, which is the creation of an ecosystem that is ultra complicated with respect to what we've done so far. But we see that all the pieces are coming along and are beginning to be created. Qualcomm has been somehow a pioneer from the telecommunication point of view in the world of drones, to the point that we were almost too early when we started, because the adoption of cellular technology was still not catching up. And still today, if we look at, there are a lot of drones being flown around with cell communication, but not using dedicated solution. So what we are doing is we're of course partnering with a lot of UAV manufacturers, we're partnering with operators, we're partnering with other groups in the industry to create the ecosystem. But one of the things in particular that is close to my heart, since I am a standards and regulation person, is to make sure that the right standardization body do the right work. So here, as I mentioned, we're working at the intersection of aviation and mobile communication. So this is not a problem of traditional communication standards, and this is not a problem of traditional aviation and regulation group. So as an example, here we are at GSMA. GSMA a couple of years ago saw the need to create a dedicated group that is a joint group with GUTMA, the global UTM standard. It's called ACJA, because it's one of the few locations where the experts from both industry, mobile communication and aviation, can get together and discuss issues. Now, ACJA doesn't necessarily generate standards, but we are creating documents that are now being considered as input by Eurocaib. Some of them actually end up triggering work in GSMA for creation of PRDs, like the LTE aerial profile. So we are being active in all these activities to make sure that we create the bridging between these two communities from a point of view of standards and regulations. We are also active on one other aspect that we think it's one building block, I didn't mention it before, and it's spectrum. Now, these devices have, UAVs and advanced air mobility, have certain requirements that need, in our view, a dedicated spectrum. And there is a lot of discussion on where the spectrum can come from, what it can be. And there is a lot of effort in various groups of standards and a regulatory body to identify a spectrum for these devices. We think it's a very key building block, because these devices will require dedicated communications, both for command and control, but also for safety services, from broadcasting remote ID to detect and avoid, and so on. And at present, we do not have a spectrum, but we have an opportunity to have this spectrum dedicated, because spectrum regulators are very interested in figuring out how to support these use cases at this industry. So we are actually actively working on that to try to figure out which spectrum should be used for this. Qualcomm, as we know, is we create chipsets in the end, but we also create services and provide services. And for this specific market of UAV and AAM, it's very important to partner with the right companies. So not just the traditional OEMs that build UAVs, but also service providers. And here service provider goes way beyond the traditional mobile operators. We're talking about UAS operator, we're talking about UAV traffic management providers. So it's again, to create the ecosystem, not just on the standards and regulation side, but also on the commercial side, to try to create overall end-to-end services. Here it's what is really going to be successful is when we will have providers that will give the overall end-to-end service and not just provide you a drone or provide you a subscription to be able to manage your drone, but the whole set of services from location management to geofencing to ensuring that we have a QoS in place. And so, as I mentioned, we are working, we're partnering with many companies to be able to achieve this.